The lawyer didn't open the envelope right away. He set it down on the desk between us like it was something that needed a moment before it was disturbed. He folded his hands on top of it, looked at me the way men his age look at other men. His age when they already know the weight of what they're about to say. "Your mother left instructions," he said quietly. "She said you'd come. She just didn't know how long it would take." I was already sitting, but something in those words made the chair feel less solid beneath me. Outside his office window, Pittsburgh kept moving. A bus pulling away from the curb. A woman with a stroller. A city that didn't know or care, that my whole understanding of the last 7 years was about to come apart at the seams. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where things actually began. My name is Robert Gaines. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a union electrician, mostly commercial work, office buildings, hospital wings, the kind of jobs where you're inside the walls and nobody sees you but everybody depends on what you did. I retired 3 years ago with a bad left knee, a pension that covers the basics, and a 2-bedroom house in Bethel Park that I've been meaning to repaint since my wife Carol passed in 2019. I'm not a man who asks for much. I learned that from my mother. Her name was Dorothy Gaines. People called her Dat. She was 81 when she died, and up until her last 2 years, she was sharper than most people half her age. She balanced her own checkbook by hand until she was 78. She remembered birthdays without writing them down. She could tell you the exact date of any conversation she'd had in the past decade, what you were wearing, what the weather was. Then my sister Pauline moved her in. Pauline is 4 years younger than me, and she has always had a gift for making decisions that benefit Pauline while sounding like sacrifices. When Mom's hip got bad and the stairs at her house became a problem, Pauline volunteered to take her in before I could even finish the sentence I was forming about assisted living options. "She's our mother," Pauline said, and the way she said it made anything I might have added sound selfish. So Mom moved into Pauline's house in Cranberry Township, 40 minutes north of me. At first, I visited every other week. Then Pauline started calling ahead to confirm. "Mom gets confused when her schedule changes," she'd say. "It's better if we keep things predictable." Then the visits got harder to arrange. Mom started sleeping more. Pauline said the doctor had adjusted her medication. When I asked which doctor, Pauline gave me a name I didn't recognize. I told myself she was just getting old, that Pauline knew better because she was there every day. I told myself these things because the alternative, that something was wrong and I was choosing not to see it, was harder to sit with. I should have measured twice. Mom passed on a Tuesday morning in February. Pauline called me at 7. Her voice was measured, the way voices are when the news isn't actually a surprise. "She went peacefully," she said. I was with her. I drove up in the snow, and by the time I arrived, Pauline's husband Gerald had already been on the phone with a funeral home. The service was the following Saturday. 40 or so people, mostly older women from Mom's church. Pauline stood near the front in a dark blazer and accepted condolences with practiced grace. I stood slightly behind her, feeling like a visitor at something I should have been at the center of. Afterward, we went back to Pauline's house. Gerald moved through the rooms with a quiet efficiency that reminded me of someone taking inventory. At one point, he picked up a small wooden box from the shelf in the hallway, the kind Mom used to keep on her dresser, and asked Pauline where she wanted it. She glanced at it and said, "Donation pile." He set it down and they moved on. I didn't say anything, but I noticed. Later, when Pauline was in the kitchen with her daughter and Gerald was talking to someone from the church, I went back to the hallway. The box was still on the shelf. It was old dark walnut, about the size of a hardcover novel, with a small brass latch. I recognized it. Mom had kept it in her bedroom my entire childhood. When I was young, I'd once asked her what was inside, and she'd smiled and said, "Things worth keeping safe." I picked it up. The latch was locked. I put it in my coat pocket. I don't entirely know why. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew that my mother had called something worth keeping safe, and my sister had called it a donation in under 3 seconds. That night, alone in Bethel Park, I sat at my kitchen table and turned the box over in my hands. There was no key. I thought about prying the latch, but something stopped me. It felt wrong somehow to force it. Whatever was inside had been locked deliberately. I set it on the mantel above the fireplace and went to bed. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing my mother's voice, not the thin voice of her last 2 years, but the real one. Clear and dry and certain. At 2 in the morning I got up, came back to the living room, and stood looking at the box in the dark. There was something taped to the underside. I'd missed it the first time. A small envelope, the kind that comes with a greeting card, sealed with a strip of Scotch tape that had yellowed at the edges. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. Not Robert, not Bob. The full name she used when something mattered. Robert Allen Gaines. Inside was a single key and 3 lines written in blue ink. The box is for you, not for sharing. Take it to Franklin Morse at Morse & Associates on Liberty Avenue. Tell him Dot sent you. I sat down on the couch and read it 3 more times. My mother had written that note before she couldn't write anymore, which meant she had written it during the years I was being gently redirected away from her, which meant she had been thinking about this while I was telling myself everything was fine. I put the key and the note back in the envelope and sat there until the sky outside the window turned gray. The next morning, Pauline called. Friendly, efficient, the way she always is when she wants something settled before I've had time to think. We should talk about the estate, she said. Gerald has some contacts, people who handled this professionally. It would be easier if we consolidated things early. Sure, I said. Have you gone through anything from the house yet? Mom's papers? Any accounts? Not yet, I said. Okay, good. A pause, just a fraction too long. Let's keep everything together until we have a full picture. Gerald says things can get complicated fast if people start pulling in different directions. I told her I understood and got off the phone. Then I looked at the box on the mantel. I opened it with the key. Inside were documents. A savings account passbook from a bank I didn't recognize. Allegheny Community Trust, a small regional institution I'd never had cause to visit. Below it, a folded piece of paper with an account number written in my mother's hand. And below that, a sealed envelope with Franklin Morse's name printed neatly on the front. And at the very bottom, a photograph. My mother and me at my retirement party, 3 years ago. She was laughing at something I'd said. I remembered the moment. She'd squeezed my arm and said quietly, just to me, "You're a good man, Robert. Don't let anyone tell you differently." I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. Morse & Associates was on Liberty Avenue in a building that looked like it had been there since Eisenhower. The elevator was slow and paneled in dark wood and smelled faintly of pipe smoke that had probably seeped into the walls 40 years ago. Franklin Morse himself met me at the door to his office. Tall, late 70s, with the careful movements of a man who had learned not to rush anything important. "Robert Gaines," he said, shaking my hand. "I was wondering when you'd come. You were expecting me? Your mother told me I would be hearing from you eventually." He gestured toward a chair. "She also said it might take you a while, that you tend to give people the benefit of the doubt longer than you should." I sat down. The office was quiet except for the low sound of traffic 8 floors below. Franklin took the sealed envelope from me, broke it open with a letter opener, and spent 2 minutes reading it without expression. Then he set it aside, folded his hands, and looked at me directly. "Your mother came to me in the spring of 2021, he said. She was still living in her own home at that point. She came alone by taxi, and she was very clear about what she wanted, which was to make sure that what she had built over her lifetime reached the person she intended." He turned his monitor so I could see the screen. A bank account summary, dates going back 12 years, and at the bottom, a current balance. I stared at the number, $460,000. My mother had $462,000, with the interest accrued to date. Your mother was a careful woman, Mr. Gaines. She saved methodically for 40 years. She also made some sound investments early, before that kind of thing was fashionable. She never talked about it, because she said money has a way of changing how people treat you once they know you have it. The room felt smaller. She was right, I said. Franklin nodded slowly. In 2021, your mother expressed concern that certain people in her life had become aware that she had significant savings. She couldn't prove anything at that point, but she wanted to take precautions. He opened a drawer and removed a folder. She moved the bulk of her assets to this account, which she opened under her maiden name, Dorothy Harlan, at a bank none of her immediate family had ever used. She gave me power of attorney for the account, not your sister, and she designated you as the sole beneficiary. I thought of Pauline, standing in the hallway, looking at the box. Donation pile. 2 words, half a second, no hesitation. Was there an attempt to access any of her accounts? I asked, though something in my chest already knew the answer. Franklin didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. In 2022, a power of attorney was filed with her primary bank, the one where she kept her everyday checking account. The document listed your sister as agent with full financial authority. Your mother had signed it. She signed it. She signed it. She signed something, Franklin said carefully. The signature on file at Allegheny Community Trust, which your mother signed in front of 2 witnesses and a notary in my presence, looks like this. He pointed to the bottom of a document. I recognized her handwriting, the careful, slightly uneven letters of a woman in her late 70s, real and familiar. Then he pointed to the copy of the power of attorney from the other bank. The signature was smoother, too consistent, the kind of thing a person produces when they're copying rather than signing naturally. She noticed it too, Franklin said quietly. That's part of why she came to me. Somewhere outside, a truck was backing up, the slow warning beep echoing up from the street. I sat there and thought about my mother, still in her own home, still sharp enough to notice a forged signature on a document bearing her own name, sharp enough to get herself to a lawyer's office by taxi without telling anyone, sharp enough to plan for the possibility that by the time this mattered, she might no longer be able to speak for herself. She hadn't been confused. She had been careful. There's more, Franklin said. He reached for his second folder, thicker than the first. Inside were printed emails, bank statements with certain transfers highlighted in yellow, and handwritten notes in my mother's neat script. Each page was dated. Each observation was specific. She'd written things like transfer made without my knowledge, approximately $4,200, noted when statement arrived and Pauline said she'd take care of the bills. I did not authorize this. At the back of the folder was a notarized statement, dated 14 months before her death. It began, I am writing this while I am able. I know what I am doing. I know what has been done to me. I am not confused. I am not forgetful. I am a woman who has been told she is both of those things, and I am leaving this record so the truth has somewhere to live after I am gone. My vision wasn't entirely clear when I finished reading it. She came in 3 times over 2 years, Franklin said. Each time she brought more documentation. She says she couldn't go to the police because Pauline had already told her doctors she was experiencing memory issues, and she was afraid no one would believe her, so she did what she could from the inside. He paused. She said to tell you one more thing, if you ever came. What? She said he always fixed things quietly. He'll know what to do. I held on to that for a moment without speaking. Franklin told me he had already been in contact with an attorney from the Elder Financial Exploitation Unit at the Allegheny County DA's office. It made the initial call 3 weeks ago, after Mom passed and the estate process began. Because that's when this kind of case either gets buried or brought to light. The investigator's name was Patricia Wohl. She wanted to meet with me. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Patricia Wohl was somewhere in her early 50s. Compact and steady, with a manner that reminded me of the best foreman I'd ever worked under. She got to the point, she listened completely, and she didn't waste her time. We met in Franklin's conference room the following afternoon. She had already reviewed the documents. She had already run the transfers. What your mother documented is consistent with a pattern we see regularly, she said. Gradual isolation, narrative control. The subject begins to be described as confused or unreliable before anyone outside the household has noticed any actual decline. Then financial access, usually framed as helping with bills. Then transfers. How much? She slid a summary across the table, not from the protected account which my mother had successfully hidden, but from the everyday accounts, the checking, a smaller savings account, and a brokerage account. Pauline had apparently known about. $83,000. Over 6 years. The power of attorney document is almost certainly forged, Patricia continued. We'll have a forensic document examiner confirm it, but based on your mother's own comparison notes and what Franklin has on file, I'm confident. She looked at me steadily. I need to ask you to do something that's going to be uncomfortable. I said nothing. I waited. Don't tell your sister. Don't change anything. Don't avoid her. Don't ask questions you wouldn't normally ask. We need a few weeks to complete the financial trace and prepare the warrant applications. If she senses something is moving against her, she'll move money, destroy records, or claim your mother gave verbal permission for everything. You're asking me to pretend. I'm asking you to be patient, she said. You've been patient for 7 years without knowing why. A few more weeks shouldn't be too hard. She wasn't wrong. I drove home through light afternoon traffic and sat in my driveway for a long time. In the kitchen, I made coffee. I drank it at the table where my mother had sat on Sunday mornings when she still came to visit, back before Pauline started scheduling things. I could picture her clearly, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, her hands wrapped around a mug, asking me in that direct way of hers how I was really doing. Not fine, Robert. Really. I had told her fine every single time. I wondered now what she had known then that she couldn't say out loud. Over the following 2.5 weeks, Pauline called 4 times. The calls had a shape to them. She would start with something general, the weather, a comment about a neighbor, and then find her way to the estate. Had I heard from any of Mom's banks? Had any mail come to my address? Was there anything in the house I'd gone through? Each time I answered with short, easy sentences. No, nothing yet. Still waiting on paperwork. You know how these things move. Gerald called once, which he almost never did. He asked about coordinating timelines and mentioned an estate attorney he and Pauline had retained. I said I'd be in touch. I wrote everything down. Dates, times, exact words. I don't know when I started doing it. I just found myself reaching for the notepad by the phone after each call and writing it down before I could forget. My mother had done the same thing. We were more alike than I'd ever said out loud. On a Thursday morning, Patricia Wool called. We're filing today, she said. Warrants for financial records, devices, and Gerald's business accounts. She paused. We'll be at your sister's house tomorrow morning at 8. I thanked her and set the phone down on the kitchen table. Then I picked it up again and called my daughter, Melissa, who lives in Columbus and knew only that her grandmother had passed, and that things are complicated. I told her I'd explain soon. She asked if I was okay. I said I was getting there. The next morning I was awake by 5:30. I made breakfast and ate it slowly, listening to the house. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A dog barking 2 streets over. The sky turning from black to gray in the way February skies do, reluctantly like they'd rather stay dark. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia served, both locations simultaneously. Pauline's house, and Gerald's contracting office in Franklin Park, where, the investigation had found, certain of my mother's funds had been routed as consulting payments for services that were never rendered. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about my mother getting into a taxi alone, carrying a wooden box, riding 40 minutes to an office on Liberty Avenue to talk to a man she trusted, doing everything right, doing it carefully, the way she had done everything her entire life. I thought about her in Pauline's house in those last years, being described as confused, being medicated, being managed. She had been neither confused nor manageable. She had been the most precise person I ever knew. I went to the garage and found my toolbox. I wasn't planning to work on anything. I just needed to do something with my hands. I replaced the outlet cover in the second bedroom that had been cracked since last spring. I checked the breaker panel. I tightened a connection on the outdoor light that had been loose since October. By noon, both Pauline and Gerald had been taken in for questioning. Patricia called me at 12:30. They're being cooperative, she said, separately, which is usually a sign that they're each hoping to make the other one look worse. She paused. That's actually helpful to us. 2 days later, Pauline's attorney called me. A smooth voice, very reasonable, the kind that makes unreasonable things sound inevitable. He said there had been a misunderstanding about the nature of the financial arrangements. He said my mother had verbally approved many of the transfers. He said these situations could be handled quietly, within the family, without the pain of a public process. I waited for him to finish. My mother kept records, I said. She kept them for 2 years. She had them notarized. She did this because she knew no one would believe her without proof, and she was right that she'd need it. I paused. She left those records for me. I'm going to use them. Silence on the line. Your client's offer, I added, is declined. I hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Then I went to the mantel and looked at the wooden box, now empty, sitting where I'd put it the night I brought it home. My mother had locked what mattered inside it. She had taped a key to the bottom and written my name on the envelope in the hand she used when things were serious. She had trusted me to find it, to understand it, to follow through. I had taken 7 years longer than I should have. But I had gotten there. The preliminary hearing was in April. Pauline came in with her attorney and sat with the careful posture of someone who had decided that composure was her best remaining strategy. She looked older. I don't know what I expected to feel when I saw her. What I actually felt was something like grief. Not for her exactly, but for the relationship we might have had if she had been a different person, or if I had asked different questions earlier, or if my mother hadn't spent her last years managing a threat from inside her own household. Gerald avoided my eyes entirely. The financial forensics were presented methodically. The forged signature was confirmed by the document examiner. The pressure inconsistency, the uniformity, the absence of the slight right-hand tremor my mother had developed after 75. The shell transfers through Gerald's company were traced backward through the 3 layers. The timeline was laid out clearly. The isolation had started in 2019, shortly after my wife Carol died, when I was less available and less observant than I would have been otherwise. That landed harder than I expected. I'd grieved Carol and grieved my distance from my mother at the same time, and I had not connected them. Pauline had known what she was doing. Franklin Morse testified about the account setup and my mother's state of mind when she visited his office. She was precise, he said. She was frightened, but she was not confused. Those are not the same thing. The judge asked him to elaborate. He did, clearly and in detail. I watched the judge write something down. Patricia Wohl testified last. She explained elder financial exploitation, the way people explain things they've seen too many times. Not dramatically, but with a heaviness that comes from repetition. She described how it escalates, how the narrative of confusion is constructed deliberately, how the goal is always to discredit the victim before the victim can credibly report anything. This case, she said, is unusual only in how well the victim documented her own exploitation. Most people in Dorothy Gaines's position don't have the access, the foresight, or frankly the energy to do what she did. She understood that her word alone would not be enough, so she made sure it was more than her word. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Pauline received 41 months, restitution ordered in full. Gerald received 26 months and was required to dissolve his company and surrender assets tied to the fraudulent transfers. When it was over, I sat in my truck in the parking structure outside the courthouse for a long time. I didn't feel relieved. I felt the specific weight of something that had been carried for years finally being set down, which is not the same as lightness. It's more like the strange muscle memory of holding something that isn't there anymore. Patricia found me near the elevator when I finally went down. "Your mother would be proud," she said. I thought about Dot Gaines getting into a taxi alone on a spring morning in 2021, carrying a wooden box, knowing exactly what she was doing and exactly how little time she might have left to do it. "I just wish she hadn't needed to be so careful," I said. Franklin called me the following week. The estate was settled. The account to Allegheny Community Trust had cleared. After restitution and legal fees, what remained was just over $400,000. My mother's 40 years of quiet, steady, careful work. He asked what I planned to do with it. I told him I wasn't sure yet. I knew I didn't want to do something fast. Fast had never suited me, and it hadn't suited my mother either. I spent the next month doing ordinary things. Fixed the porch railing I'd been putting off. Called Melissa more often. Started cooking real dinners instead of reheating whatever was in the freezer. Went to the cemetery twice. Once for Carol, once for Mom. Talk to both of them in the way you do when you're not sure if talking helps, but you know silence doesn't. In June, I bought a property on the south side, a former hardware store, empty for 3 years, big front windows, concrete floor, solid bones. I spent most of the summer renovating it myself, which the bad knee made slower and more complicated than I would have liked. But there was something necessary about doing the work with my own hands. I opened it in September. It's a community repair space. Electrical, mostly, but also basic plumbing, appliances, whatever people bring in. A lot of older residents come in on Tuesday mornings. People on fixed incomes who can't afford to replace what breaks and don't always know someone they can call. We fix things, and I teach people to fix things themselves. There's something in that transaction that I can't fully explain, but that feels like the right use of my hands and the right use of what she left me. On the back wall above the main workbench, I mounted a framed photograph. My mother and me at my retirement party, the same photograph that was in the wooden box. She's laughing. Her eyes are bright. She looks like herself. Beside it, framed in the same simple wood, I put the last line she wrote to me in her letter, the one Franklin gave me after the sentencing. I knew you would come. You always fix things quietly, without making a show of it. So did I. That's where you get it from. Use what's left to make something that lasts. People ask about the photograph sometimes. I tell them it's my mother. If they ask what she was like, I tell them she was the most precise person I ever knew, and that she understood something I took too long to learn. That being careful is not the same as being passive, and that patience used with intention is one of the strongest things a person can be. I still have the wooden box. It sits on the mantel in Bethel Park, empty, latch open. Some things are worth keeping, even after what was inside them has been passed along. My sister writes occasionally from the facility where she's serving her sentence. The letters are not what I'd call honest. They're the kind of writing that circles around accountability without landing on it. Explanations that are really requests for absolution dressed up in the language of reflection. I read them once and don't respond. There are doors that close for reasons, and reopening them is not the same as healing. I've learned to tell the difference. Melissa visited for Thanksgiving. We sat at the same kitchen table where my mother used to sit on Sunday mornings, and we talked for a long time after dinner. About Carol, about Mom, about the things you don't say when you're busy assuming everything is fine. It was the best conversation I'd had in years. Melissa said at one point that she wished she'd known Grandma Dot better toward the end. I told her that the woman she knew, careful, sharp, funny in a dry way, never needing to raise her voice to be the most certain person in a room, that was Grandma Dot all the way to the end. She was never less than herself. She was just surrounded by people who needed her to be less than herself, and she refused. That refusal is what I have left of her. That, and the box. And the photograph, and a repair shop on the south side that was paid for by 40 years of a woman's quiet, deliberate, underestimated work. She measured twice for most of her life. She just needed someone to make the final cut. I'm glad I was the one she trusted to do it. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, if someone you love has been described as confused a few too many times by the same person, if you've been gently redirected away from asking questions, if something has been handed off or thrown away before you had a chance to look at it, I hope you'll hear this part clearly. What you're feeling is not paranoia. It is attention. And attention, when you act on it, is how the truth survives. Thank you for spending this time with me. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful to hear it. Tell me what you took away, or where you're listening from. There are more stories like this one, about patience and about the things people leave behind when they've run out of time to speak for themselves. If those are the kinds of stories that matter to you, I hope you'll stay with us.